the author of a text that's available in the bookstore under this course as a supplemental text, Born in Berkeley. And she's going to talk about the sexual revolution from a personal developmental point of view. So,
okay, yeah, this is the book Born in Berkeley. It's just now available in the Foothill College bookstore. So, and it's assigned as a supplemental text for human sexuality. And we're going to dialogue a little bit this morning. Just give you kind of a summary of the book itself. Right now in our period of time, after the anniversary of the 9/11 tragedies, the book overall deals with another difficult transitional time in United States history, which was the 1960s. How many people now are really up on the 60s? Anybody? Sort of, I know for a while when we were doing talks of the 60s, you know, decades after, everybody was so attuned and plugged in, but I know now with younger people, you talk about the 60s and people just kind of don't react. So what do you think, when you think of the 60s, what do you think of? Anything come to mind? Woodstock, okay. Anything else? So blank. Okay, so interesting. Well, the death of President Kennedy really changed a lot of things. The struggle for, it was called Negro people then, African American now, to vote in the South. And the beginning of the Vietnam War brought about an unusual kind of period in our time. And just like there's a war now that people have different opinions about, so did they then. And the young girl who is the basis of this novel, who's based somewhat on my experiences a lot, and on some of the experiences of others that I knew, she grew up, as I did, in the Menlo Park area. Actually, have any of you heard of the United States Geological Survey? It does the mapping on Middlefield Road. Everybody knows about that. Well, that was what my dad used to run, and your instructor feels that when he was at College of San Mateo and I was in high school that we might have met during that period. And so this youthful character feels like all these events in the world are going to turn the tide of the world energy to something better and something different. And she's very idealistic, but she's got a tough mother, and she flees and she goes through a series of experiences that have to do with her idealism, coming of age, and a lot of them have to do with sexuality. And the reason that we chose this as a supplemental text, or I was invited to present this as a supplemental text, is that a lot of the sexual encounters and things in the book really sort of trace this big pivot point in our attitudes towards sexuality that have gotten us to where we are today at this point. There are lots of different passages about it, and I don't know where you are right now in what you're focusing on in this class. Can anybody share that with me, what some of the themes are?
they're right now working on special projects. So, depends on what their focus is. It could be anything from homophobia to STDs to...
Great, good idea. You know, STDs, people weren't as aware of STDs then, except for venereal disease. Nobody knew there weren't any more severe STDs, so it was a time of sexual naivety. You know, people could have, were having unprotected sex. They didn't, the worry about sex then was that people should use a condom not to have pregnancy. And if people developed like venereal disease, which was sort of a scary thing, they could take an antibiotic, but there wasn't so much fear about things that could really end your life. So it was a really different time that way. And for girls, it was a period where, first of all, like growing up in the 50s and stuff, people had been taught to be nice. There were nice girls, and then there were like good girls, and they were really differentiated, good and bad girls. And now it seems like my sense is that it's sort of cool to appear to be more sexual. Is that correct? Like it's supposed to be. You see people with like slut T-shirts and passion wear and stuff like that. So maybe somebody can tell me is there still any split between for women, for young women, between being sexually available as being a bad thing and being kind of saving yourself as being good? That may be really gone, but that was incredibly how it was then. How is it now, you think? Yeah.
I think it's not the same, but it's got to be a little worse now. Like girls are now, like it's hard to tell a good girl what's a bad girl now.
Good and bad?
Yeah, because so many people are leaning more towards the sexiness, the being out there, the showing off their body.
I noticed that.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
and that was like, it was really bad to do then. But my question to you, what is your name? Sharice, my question to you, is it for real? Are these people really into their own sexuality, or kind of how fitting in and how they look? Doing it as a show or doing it for real?
I think some people, they really have fell in love with their body, and so they like to show it. And then some people see people who have fallen in love with their body and want to imitate that. So that's where I think it's at now. Where's a lot of imitation going on.
A lot of imitation.
Yeah, and the women who are comfortable with their body is just plain exposing it because they feel like it's my body, I'm comfortable.
The other question is, are women comfortable with their bodies, all different body types, or is there still just one body type you're supposed to be?
There's still just one body type.
So what's free about that? You know?
Yeah.
So then, in that way, I'd say, did the sexual revolution really happen, or has nothing really changed? You know? Because there's a difference between what you want to do sexually and how you really feel and what you really like versus doing to be accepted by what everybody wants to see in you. You know, so that was the thing, that there was this sort of big double standard then. What about guys who want to show their body? Can guys do the same thing now, or is there a double standard for guys? What's going on with that? Anybody speak to that? Male person speak to that? What's going on with sexuality if you're a guy? Women can be more assertive now to start sexual things. Well, anyway, this was like, I'll just read little sections of this. Like, so here she is very young, and she's with, I ventured out as far as, she lives in Menlo Park. I ventured out as far as poorer Redwood City and richer Atherton, where an older student, overdeveloped, wealthy Letty Underwire, invited me on my first double date at her parents' empty mansion. I watched Letty's bosom groped by slim, cashmered Stanford University boys. I was jackknifed for an uncomfortable evening in some guy's lap. Letty Underwire had a girlfriend, Emma C. Smith, equally buxom, also older than me, who wore sweaters, who had chosen sex as part of her visible persona, but there the resemblance stopped. So there was still kind of left over from the 50s, the sweater girls, that was kind of like this, you know, and showing the breasts and the things. But then it kind of changed, and people didn't want to wear a bra, and it wasn't like to look like Marilyn Monroe. Another weird thing about sexuality you might want to think about is that they're fads. Let's just take how women look. That part I know. I can't speak to the guy thing. But there are fads on your body, and it depends on what's going on in the world, in politics. Like in the 1890s, where people were still struggling to have enough food and things, you had to be a full-figured woman to be sexy, period. You must be full-figured. And if you weren't, if you were like a model thin today, they thought you were sick and didn't want you as a partner. Okay, that's one way. Then it should be.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah, that's the way it should be.
I agree with you.
So then after World War I, when there had been this big war and tremendous change in the world after World War I, the guys had been at war and it was with their buddies and everything, then it was not cool to look like a girl. So the girls put tape on their breasts and they cut their hair really short and they looked like another soldier, because that was like kind of the in thing, you know, the soldier buddy look. So then you were not supposed to have breasts. That and the flappers too was a little bit different. Then after World War II, when so many people died, you know, in the concentration camps and the World War II soldiers, everybody died, then they were trying to have babies again. And so motherhood was a really cool thing, and motherhood is symbolized by breasts. And so then you have the big bras and the points and everything, and it was a lot about motherhood and breasts. And then there are guys in that era, the only thing they could relate to are women's breasts, because anything else was supposed to be bad if they did it. And some guys I know who are older said, well, they were told by their gym teachers if they liked anything else other than breasts or did anything else with women's bodies, like oral sex, that hair would grow on their hands and bad things would happen to them. So that was the whole breast era. And then that was sort of going on in the 50s. Then all of a sudden there were people who were saying, we don't, like women are saying, it's weird how we have to dress. For example, when I went to high school, you had to wear a girdle, underarm pads with little pins, and if you wore pants, you were expelled. I'm not that old, you know, I'm younger than this guy, and you were expelled in Menlo Park if you wore pants. Do you realize how much it's changed our ideas of our body? Especially women have changed this much. And you don't realize where you are now, sitting in a classroom with comfortable pants. Every woman in here would be thrown out of school. You don't know that. People forgot that. So that's why the sexual revolution, we were really in a very, very tight box. And, you know, male sexuality, I think there were, maybe Larry can address that. There were probably a push to prove yourself and score, like a father telling you, don't get that girl pregnant. I mean, there was this, the good girl, bad girl thing was really big. And if you had a child, if you got pregnant, total shame. You wouldn't be just like an actress now, have your own baby, get married later. You know, you'd have to be driven out of town. I mean, it was a totally different world. Yeah, what is it?
No, I agree with you about this whole sex era, because now, right now, we're in like the booty stage, and like everybody's like having the booty going on, and you show your booty off, and that's really cool right now.
Booty or booby?
Booty.
Booty?
Yeah, like everybody's wearing since J-Lo, everybody's wearing the low cut pants and to show, you know, the top part of your behind, show
Yeah.
that.
Can
And like
you
a
do that
couple,
if you weigh a few extra pounds? Or you're
Yeah.
supposed to be thin?
yeah, you're supposed to be thin.
You're supposed to be thin. Well, what if you want to show your booty and you got a lot of booty?
Just show my
So that is not really that hasn't changed. So that's supposed to be cool. So then they take the girl to the juvenile facility, and they could do a virginity test on you. They actually would do a virginity test to see if you were a virgin. Can you imagine that, how embarrassing that is? And if you had sex with someone like this girl, they could put you away in a restraining facility for 3 years. And this girl her father got a lawyer, so she gets out. But if you had sex once, you were like a high school girl, and you were up at the juvenile facility at Hillview, then you were going to be locked up for 3 years. So that's a really different version of sexuality. But then people were questioning this, and they were starting to change this and question this. And that's where this girl, Carolyn, if you get the book, you'll read some of these encounters and stuff, which I think I've identified the page numbers. A lot of the different ones could apply to special projects because they deal with some of the themes that you're encountering. So here there was a progressive school called Pacific High School where, has everybody heard of the Grateful Dead?
Yeah.
You know what that is? Okay, I went to that school that Bob Weir went to. He was older than myself. And up there, we were kind of experimenting. Maybe all these things we've been taught weren't exactly true. So we went way into the other way. So here's an encounter with this girl. She's, I guess I could read a descriptive, explicit thing here. It's human sexuality. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. A little bit. But it's not written to be like a porn novel. It's just written to talk about these changes. So she's with this kid from the high school, and they're in this hot tub, and she really hasn't had many experiences, except one boyfriend in Presbyterian school and going to that Hillview place. I watched Jeff strip, and I followed suit. He stepped over the stone ledge and disappeared deep into the smaller of the two tubs. First his legs receded, then the dark member at his groin beneath his wide white trunk. I saw at last his head above the water, and then his wet hands making wide, playful gestures for me to follow. I dropped everything on one of the benches that lay before the edge of the deep drop, that's the cliff at Big Sur. Then, teats hard and wizened from the cold, bare buttocks and back, feeling the whispery wind, I slid over to him, stepped high over the stone side that formed a seat, sat on the coarse slab, until goose-bumped everywhere, I sank into the hottest water I'd ever felt. I slowly floated down, buried by sulfur water. Then before I could assimilate this, his foot poked at me. My thigh was grazing his back and forth. This is beautiful, Jeff. He grabbed at me. My breasts were floating, the nipples made crests of flesh waves. He put his arms around my back and pulled me closer. This thing was wet, rubbery, wide, and stiff. It perked the inside of my thigh in its wide swing, side to side. I could feel the ridge at the end of it. He was rubbing it against me. He didn't seem to be able to stop. I moved away, spread my legs wide, sitting, but I floated, bent my head in the water, outstretched my hands. I surrendered to the water. But my new-formed breast still floated. I coiled like a fetus and bobbed away to the corner, far from Jeff. Well, this goes on, and they have their sort of scene there. But a lot of times, and he asked her, are you a virgin? I'm a virgin. You had to lie. But how much of a lie was it? After a pretty chaste relationship for 9 months with a Presbyterian youth boy, I tried something one night late at my parents' house, but he couldn't go very far, and I didn't feel anything. And so it goes on, and she does have this encounter with him, and now she feels like, now I wasn't a girl, but an incipient woman. But a lot of times then, if you were having sex then, the next thing that happened, after all the box I just described of the 50s and how extreme it was there was a lot about trying to be cool. Trying to be cool now in this new world where people were saying, you could have sex if somebody asked you, and it's ideal, and you had to be like real cool and real ideal about it. And I'm not sure people knew 100% more than they know now. So she starts getting thrown in at a time when it's very bad to be sexual. She's starting to have these sexual experiences, one after another. And she gets thrown into, and this is all really true stuff, of the kinds of sexuality that was going on in this era right here, in Los Altos, Menlo Park, San Francisco, Mexico. This was happening, and it really did affect our idea of sexuality today. So she goes on, another encounter she has, she's out in the woods in Big Sur. She hitchhikes away from her mother, and she gets up in Big Sur, and her mother was kind of had been a love child in the 20s, so, and her mom is pretty actually sexual on the one hand, but she has to live in the same very limited box too. So the girl gets up, she's in Big Sur, and she meets these older people, and they're weaving stuff by the ocean and writing poetry and everything. And some guy just gestures to her, so she follows him all the way in the woods, and they sort of is there, they have sex, at least from his view, and out again. They never speak, and they call her Girl. That's her name now. So she starts getting in these encounters, but maybe she's not, a lot of it is about being cool, and at a certain point she's been through a civil rights march, and also the anti-Vietnam War marches have started. And so finally she decides she's 16, she wants to really have an authentic sexual experience for herself. She's had experiences by herself, but she wants to have that experience and thinks there's something wrong with her if she doesn't. So she gets into an experience on New Year's Eve that proves that she has that sexual responsiveness. But again, she's doing this under the guise of the very bad girl, because that's the way that it was to be sexual if you were a girl then. And after that, after some drug experiences, she's off in Mexico. Supposed to be a summer student, but instead she's hiding out. She meets a young Mexican guy who's training to be a doctor, and he sets her up in some apartment. And she's having a lot of sexual experiences, some of them chosen by other people. And she meets some kid at school, and they go hitchhiking away after summer school in Mexico in the 60s. She's only 16 years old. Another girl's supposed to come, but the girl's aunt won't let her go. So she's on the road hitchhiking now through Mexico at age 16. And she's with this young guy about 19 who's been in the Navy and at Brown University. But when she wants to do sexual things that she thinks feels good, he goes, no, only lesbians want that. So there's homophobia right there. He doesn't want to do things or address her body in ways that feel good to her, because he said, oh no, the only lesbians like that. So she's like still trying to be cool. And so she's there having these sexual experiences, sort of. And that leads to her meeting a guy. They hide out, and they meet some very unusual people who lead them to a guy, an archaeologist, who leads them one night to a house of prostitution. An older guy, he says, you could stay with me. They don't have any money left. But every night I go to the whorehouse in Mexico. So the girl goes there too. And they have mariachis, and they have like people hanging out, and she's telling the prostitute women, you know, you should think of women's rights, maybe you don't want to do this. And they're way in the dark of Mexico, and some guy shows up who knows Ken Kesey. Have any of you heard of Ken Kesey, who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? He's a very famous author of this 1960s, and he wrote, and then there was a painted bus. He had a bunch of people in this giant bus that decided to break away from the way they were brought up to be, and they gave each other weird names. Like one woman was called Doris DeLay. There were a whole bunch of Doris Day movies, and in the Doris Day movie, the woman always was supposed to hold out and not have sex. She was Doris DeLay. So they get on this bus with Doris DeLay and these merry pranksters, and Ken Kesey's group is hiding out in Mexico because of he had advocated the incoming of drug experimentation, which I happen actually to be against, having seen those times. But in those times, that was what was going on. And have you ever heard of that big psychedelic bus? Nobody even knows anymore. That's strange. It's in the Smithsonian Institute. We asked people before, some of you have come in later, what do you think of, when you think of the 1960s, do you think of anything? When you see those lowrider pants that you're talking about, Cherise, they came from the 60s. That's where they started, the lowrider pants. This isn't new. The lowrider pants, all this is going on then. This is where it started, and all this stuff is true stories of people who lived through that. Anybody else, what do you think of when you think of the 60s? Images? Yeah. Feminism. Actually, probably was more the 70s.
Yeah, I know, but still.
You think of feminism, yeah, it was okay. Yeah, it went from girls, it was okay, it was bad, you had to say no to sex. Overnight, you better say yes in certain circles. So it just, but feminism, figuring out what you want to do, came later. Now, there's a lot of female sexuality that could be going on, but it was definitely like there were different things like homophobia going on. There's a scene later in the book where a bunch of kids are at this bathhouse in Esalen, and there's this young guy, and the very cool kids, you know, he's gay, but they say, you know, you just haven't found the right girl. So nobody was real open about gay issues. In the popular movement, the radical movement, there were a lot of things that weren't really addressed so much then. Other images of the 60s. Nobody knows anything about it?
Hippies.
Hippies? Anything else? Good. Drugs. Drugs. So these sexual encounters, I mean, she gets taken to jail once for being out on the road, and the older people make her strip naked and bend over and pick up little soap out of the shower. So there were some sexual things going on that weren't really addressed in those instances. She gets in Mexico, and in Mexico, she and this boy are hitchhiking around, and they meet these kids. And these kids came out of New England. They got sexual, and their parents put them in a mental hospital, and that happens sometimes. And they're called Curly and McGee. Now, this is real explicit. Should I read it or not, Larry? Okay. Okay. I'm McGee, a long, lanky, tousled boy, narrower than Nora's, suggested in a sleepy voice, and I'm Curly. They were hustlers who begged here regularly. Friendly, they quickly told us, rather me, everything about themselves. Nora's was buried in existential cool. Glad just to be here at last, he was neither looking forward nor backward in time, just digging this new scenery. He was on the road. That's my character's boyfriend. Curly and McGee had met in a mental hospital in Vermont. Somehow they'd gotten out, fucked in the woods. Bobby didn't have to be taught, Curly purred. He knew how, just from himself. How Curly came to talk, like she heralded from North Carolina, I did not know. But so did many Californian suburban hippies too, so no matter. Curly, tiny, frizzy-haired, small-breasted doll in a gingham dress and bare feet, ran her crooked finger up McGee's vertebrae. He smiled. In my same new way, like the guy writers, I could see him happy at last. Here she's imagining their sexuality, wedging his whole thing in, banging at Curly's little smooth snatch, upturned to him like a jelly roll. The hip male authors I'd barely read were fast becoming the language of my imagination. When they dragged him back to the mental hospital, it must have been in a sex stupor because it took them 3 more weeks to get out this last time. McGee set it up. He had a taste. Nothing could keep him from her. From her cunt, that's how they say it, Miller and the like. So then she starts imagining, she's having these images. It became very cool to talk about sexuality and use street terms and talk about not just like very nice girl stuff. It became cool to use heavier language. What's going on with that now, do you think? Do people use freely all kinds of terms and language? Yeah, what do you think?
I think there are some certain words that people use all the time, but then there are a few words that are worse that people tend not to use unless they really feel
Want to put
bad.
people down?
Yeah, like for instance, cunt.
Is a bad word now?
Yeah, I mean, of course, all these words are bad, but I don't think it's used as much as, for instance, bitch.
So it could be a bad word. You know, I think in Chaucer's time, did any of you read Erica John's work, Fear of Flying? She was an author in the 70s. And there were some terms, like the term for female sexuality, that actually had a good period, like in Chaucer's England. Because these terms have been used lots of different ways. In the Hindu, in the 60s, the girl, especially the people who've been taught to be really nice, all of a sudden they want to use these terms to be powerful. You know, we can throw these terms around, we can be cool. So that's what this girl is doing when she throws those terms around. But, and that's what she's doing at that point. You know, I have a graduate degree in transpersonal studies, which is psychology, philosophy, religion. I've been given talks in churches, so I do a lot of different things. But they, in the Hindu tradition, the body parts are sacred. They have the male lingam and the female yoni, and these are like sacred parts. It was here. It's under what? Under, okay. Like the lingam, I think it's lingam and yoni, and they actually have shrines. They have like caves and stuff where most of, like for 30,000 years, our ancestors saw God as a creative mother. And up until from the Paleolithic period to the Greek period, mostly God was seen as a mother or a mother-father. And then when the name and property stopped going from grandmother to mother to daughter, and it went from grandfather to father to son, then we saw God as male. And maybe some people are seeing God beyond his gender now. But in those ancient times, even leading up until remnants of that now, we saw like the female body part was the yoni, and you can see caves that made a shrine that looked like female genital anatomy. And lingam was male, and that was like phallic, you know, temples and stuff like that. Or and the body was sacred, and sexuality was considered part of your spirit. So I think what was happening in the 60s is they were trying to break away from the very good and the very bad, so they just plunged into it. They plunged into it, and they threw those terms around. It was cool instead. Maybe you could use those terms and be cool. So that deals with a lot of that. And then they get to Mexico, and they're staying with this radical author called Ken Kesey. And Ken Kesey's experimenting with mixing relationships around. Like, he has a wife named Faye, and he has some boys. But he's just had a baby with another woman called Mountain Girl, who is the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of President Adams and of our country. And so Mountain Girl and Ken Kesey have just had this baby named Sunshine. And Ken Kesey's wife named Faye is having a love affair with George. And so these kids get there, and they're in the middle of Mexico, and they're like teenagers. You can use Mountain Girl's room tonight. She's with George, man. Our new friend sounded hesitant, like we should know that. You'll have to ask her tomorrow. Left alone in the room, we shied away from the bed, where leftover covers entwined like sweaty flesh. We stayed away from someone else's love altar. Instead, we unrolled our blanket near a wall and lay still and separate in the buzzing night heat. So now she's seeing how people could not divorce, but change and rearrange their relationships, everybody agreeing into, instead of monogamy, they're having polygamy and polyandry. Do you know what polygamy and polyandry are? Have you gotten into that? Polygamy, people mostly know. And I visited towns that are polygamous that go on right now. What is polygamy? Pardon me? Multiple, one guy has a bunch of women. That's polygamy.
Can't be the other way around.
Oh yeah, what's polyandry?
Or one that has a lot of partners.
One woman has a bunch of husbands and men. And so Ken Kesey and his wife were doing polyandry and polygamy. The only different thing is, instead of like either one person and afterwards you hate them and you divorce them, they weren't doing that. They were keeping a loving connection and a group family. And so they had some switched around relationships. So I got to see that. I really went there, and I got to see a lot of the stuff. And it made me think that our way of doing things now, although I like the idea of monogamy myself, if people were going to do something different, they didn't have to do it by lying and by like hating the person they'd been with before. They could like change it and include and make a big family. So I saw there were some really interesting things. The book talks about a little bit about polyandry and polygamy, about homophobia, about changes in sexuality, about using real out there sexuality, lots of different parts. So there was also then she comes back to Palo Alto actually, and she's like hanging out with, she's still very young, she's got 2 girlfriends a little bit older, and they're living in a place called Litton House. If you go in Palo Alto now, you go down Litton Street near the police department, there used to be an old Victorian house, and the top floor with the little round tower was where the hippies hung out. Very famous ones. There is a guy called Neil Cassidy. How many people have read On the Road? Do you know of Jack Kerouac? What's happened to the world? Jack Kerouac wrote probably the most important American novel that's ever been written, modern novel. It's called On the Road. And it's about a couple guys, and they start zooming back and forth across the United States and through Mexico. And they really, this was very famous in the late 40s and 50s. They're breaking away. They're beat. They're tired of the sameness. They're tired of war. They want to live a different way, and many sexual adventures. But anyhow, this guy, Neil Cassidy, the book was based on. I actually knew that person, and I had a girlfriend, and she's like, here's this guy looks so old to us by this point, you know. And he died in Mexico later, but he's there in this Litton house, and all these other people are there. And she had left her passport in Mexico. That really happened to me. And this guy who seems real old, 29 at least, they're doing all the sexual stuff is happening between them. I don't know whether to read this or not, but I can talk about it or maybe some dialogue here.
Oh, read it.
Read it?
Yeah, read it all.
You guys want me to read all this graphic stuff? Yes or no? Is anybody not
watching
watching?
porn, so I mean,
You okay?
in this class.
So you've already watched porn in this class? Let's talk about porn for a minute, then I will read it. Did you notice when you watch porn, was it liberated porn or not? Sometimes there's porn, but it only uses the same type of people, the same age group, the same size people, the same race people. Did you watch porn like that? Or
It
did
was,
you?
it was like, you watch this thing about people who are married, but then like have like, they're been together for years, so their sex life is just probably not the same, not as good. So they explored their sexuality
Okay.
and they
So it's kind of,
indulged in sexual smorgasbord.
did you think it's full or sort of dumb or what? Did you think? Okay. Okay. Okay, so here is like, this is sort of an explicit passage out of this book. But if anybody doesn't want explicit writing, you need to speak now. Okay. All right. And this is written as part of the book because it was really true to the time. And usually these passages we haven't read when we performed in coffee shops. The book is again at Foothill College Library, a bookstore, and also Kepler's. But good to get it here and support the bookstore. So here's about Gordon Fraser. Gordon, a wise, wizened 29 at least, swiveled his thin hips only slightly. And this is the girl talking. I did almost all the swiveling, liking the feeling, rubbing when I wanted to, liking the feathered light drag of Mons against his pubis. In the semi-darkness, I could hide the feelings of real, though mild, genital pleasure. Gordon smacked his chocolate-covered lips and whistled a tune from that repertoire collected for his only purpose, to sound cool. Okay, pull in. Here we go. So, he often squeezed his shoulder blades together in response to questions. Like when I'd ask if the garage was his or still mine at all, he'd scrunch his shoulders and say, "That's Tripp's." "What, Gordon?" "That's Tripp's." He'd rock, lifting his shoulders to his ears. "Why are you doing that?" I'd ask. "Because I want to." He'd grin his elfin grin and smile and lean one hand proprietorially on the beam of his garage. "That's Tripp's." "Gordon, why do you do that? We're talking." "You can do it too. Do it anytime like this, and people will think you're cool, man. That's all." "That's Tripp's." He seemed to be glad to be the instructor of cool. Far out. I'd finally agree. But after these inane lessons, I had something over on Gordon, although I was convinced he knew, when lying down, what he was doing. He produced these sensations in me effortlessly because he was so cool. But oh, they felt good. When so engaged, he liked my black turtleneck lifted up a little. It was cool in here. He played with my breasts. Then he dropped his hands and laid still, a shadow of cool in the subdued, fire-mounting dark. I tried to pace myself to his controlled rhythm. I was a hungry tigress cub. The little ripple of orgasm that squeezed out between the planes of our tongue and groove loins bubbled up and pawed through the chestnut-colored hair of my snatch, as Gordon too called my feminine center. Again, I wanted to try again, and Gordon didn't stop. He only slowed his movements. The sting and the numbness of just after passed, and the itchy gathering sensation, even if it wasn't a mature woman's force, out of the tip, hot red erect, and then the light inner ecstatic orgiastic clutching, it was at least another step in learning with a man. Wow, that was almost as good, I thought, as myself. Not quite at all, but nearly. I didn't like Gordon, but made myself think I did. After these sessions, he would prop himself up and sit to enjoy more chocolate-covered cherries. His otherwise nondescript penis sat up, drowsily in his lap. Neat, I thought, the way it collapsed in that straight position, like one of those three-piece camp cups that compress down into 2 or 3 inches. Gordon was heading for an early death from a drug overdose. He turned my good friend Norris onto acid. He'd taken my garage. Still, Gordon showed me one thing that chicks like, and also how to squeeze my shoulders together to look cool. I rarely do it. I mean, I never do it. It would be nice if I did it sometimes, because it's sad that a man could leave nothing of himself behind that anyone would want to imitate. So she's seeing like a guy's penis totally from her own point of view. Not exactly from how porn movies show it. She's really enjoying the sexual stuff that's going on, but she also has the freedom to describe it the way she sees it. And a lot of times we see ourselves the way the pictures of the media tell us that we are. You know, I went to this lecture at University of San Francisco, and there was this painter named Judy Chicago. She painted a thing called the dinner party. This was in the 70s, and she painted these flower plates that were to look like the genitals of famous women. Okay, and she had a dinner party with all the plates. That's really out there, right? So we went up there, we went to this lecture, my daughter and I and different people, and then she had this one dark slide, and we couldn't see what it was. It looked like maybe a woman's legs, and something maybe looked like a phallic thing. We could not figure it out. She says, that's an experience a lot of you have had. It was a woman taking the Tampax out. She says, you can't see it because there's no picture of it in the media. There's no way for you to see this common experience because there's no picture of it. The way we picture things is the way we start to see ourselves. If you show a picture of a certain way to look, in about 5 minutes, you could be brainwashed in 1 hour. We could say that people with brown eyes or bald heads are really good, and everybody else is bad, and you actually can be brainwashed in about an hour to think that you're no good if you don't have brown eyes or a bald head. That's true. You know, so how you're programmed to see your body, that has a lot to do with how you see yourself in sexuality. For men, there were insecurities if a man was shorter. There were insecurities if a man's anatomy was this size or that size. There's a lot of stuff put on guys also, and a lot of things put on women. And I know the women's part better just because I'm in this body for a while, which is a good one. So, so there are things about how she's seeing sexuality from the inside out. And so different things. Let's just think of other little examples here. Kind of a typical 60s encounter. Here was one. Also, this book does have a lot of body parts in it, as this young girl is seeing them, you know, different ones. Weeks later, after party at Olive San Francisco Art Institute, Alan Chase Streeter draped his long legs and huge, incandescent, uncircumcised penis across my thighs. It felt light in his dark apartment. He lit a cigarette. It was cold, with a draft under the door, and the big, high, unheated ceilings. Way outside his flat, the ring of the cable car clanging up Hyde Street. After sex, for some reason, I was afraid being with him. Heir to the Manhattan Bank, brother a curator of the Boston Art Museum. It wasn't that, though. You know, this was different, something special. And then it just talked about the insecurity, like when you're doing things, but you're not totally secure with yourself because of your age and stuff, and that uncomfortableness. And he paints her naked in the bathtub, but he keeps painting over it. And this section, I won't read all of it, but you can read it if you get it. Hard to meet anyone when you're young and try out your life on them, he would say now. If he had anything at all to say about the subject of the painting, who's blued over mons veneris, that's that yoni, he would, with greater wisdom, have left just the way it was. Later on, she encountered somebody who actually in real life is now, we've talked to that man many years later, he is a bisexual man. The first person she really falls in love with doesn't tell her he's bisexual because it wasn't acceptable. And everybody was being so cool. And she said, did you ever have sex with a guy? What did you ever do? And he lies. And he says that I could probably another book, he says that he didn't, but then he brings a friend into it and he has all these feelings, and that's probably a sequel. She thinks that maybe all guys are going to be gay, and maybe she should go out and try sex with a woman. There are all these things that happened in those times. And also, there seems to be a real emphasis in talking to younger friends. I actually know Julia. I could talk to a young woman that Larry knows. And there are people like now, people talk about how there's even emphasis on being, like lesbian sex right now is supposed to be kind of in. Is that correct? Am I right? There's a lot of, is that real? Is that for real, Charisse? Or is it really happening? Are people really, or is it like cool to do it?
It's cool to do it now.
What do you think?
Yeah.
What's your name?
I don't know. What is my name?
Yeah.
Emily. I don't know if it's really the sex, but I know a lot of guys tend to like it when girls kiss.
Yeah, well, that's been an old thing, the guy fantasy, but secretly, okay, I'm gonna just break ground in a feminist way. There's the idea that that's really cool, but I bet you if you scratch the surface of a lot of straight women, let's say, they might prefer to see straight guys kiss if they had to pick, but that's not being done, because it's like, isn't that interesting? There's some women who might prefer to see that. I mean, just as a crazy fantasy, maybe not everyday thing. So again, whose eyes are you looking at it from? Are you doing it to be cool, or are you doing it because it really turns you on and you think it's neat? Do you want to be monogamous and celibate and save yourself for a loving relationship? Is that your ideal? Because it really comes down to what is your ideal? What do you really hope for? What do you believe? But it is a time in human sexuality to explore the spectrum of sexuality. There are a lot of examples of this in this supplemental text for Berkeley. Any questions, Larry, that you might want to generate?
How did you come to feel comfortable about being so open about your sexuality?
Well, I just said it was not sort of the character, but how do I feel comfortable? Boy, my mother was a pretty neat person. She passed away a year and a half ago in the area of sexuality, challenging in other ways. And she said she kind of instilled a pretty good, healthy, natural attitude. Sexuality is something, it's really good, especially with a person you really love. And she was pretty open and natural about the body. She used to make mud puddles for us to run around in half naked. So I didn't have a big religious dichotomy or something put on me about it. But I think that good girl, bad girl was really still put in there a little bit. Other questions? Anybody else have questions or comments? Yeah.
Did you ever go down to Mexico and do some of that stuff?
The truth?
True.
Yeah.
A lot of the photos.
Some of it is. Some of it is. Yeah. Yeah, but this is the thing, we don't tell my dad I wrote this book. So if he ever runs into it, she did it. Some, yes. Some I really did do. It really did happen to me or someone else. Sometimes I saw people more in the drug scene than me. Yes, go
I
ahead.
think it's only natural for people to think like that and just to wonder and experiment, because I know a lot of people I don't know them, but their actions and stuff, they're probably experiencing those things and finding out what they like and all that with sex. So I'm thinking those feelings that I hear in your book, it's not too shocking to me because it's so common and because everybody kind of feels that way or thinks that way or wonder,
Right. So you're saying it's an age-old story. It's not just for this time. This is the coming of age of another.
It revolved
It's
over.
a coming of age of today, really. It's just that it was breaking through to be doing it then, but it's really the coming of age to today. It was the people then that broke the ground to make it a little bit more like it is now. And yeah, any other comments? And I have copies of this here, which are slightly cheaper than the bookstore as it is now, though we're going to adjust the price if you want. Okay.
What high school did you go to?
I went personally to Menlo Atherton and Pacific High School. Menlo Atherton.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, anybody else? Question, yeah.
Do you know where East Palo Alto is?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I totally know where
Yeah.
East Palo Alto is.
Because some people, they grew up on a different side, but yeah, okay.
No, well, then I wrote another book that isn't published now yet called Where the Flowers Have Gone, and it's where a guy who grew up in East Palo Alto and a girl that grew up in Menlo Park, they meet each other in the 80s, they're teaching, and then they find out that the guy thinks they knew each other way back then. And then it kind of, in fiction, it goes into the guy's mind and experiences what it's like to be in a Catholic family where there's a lot of mixed messages about sex going on. So, yeah, East Palo Alto, I think, is a very cool place. And when I went to the Ravenswood high school reunion with some friends, I found out how cool people felt Ravenswood was compared to how, when they had to be bused over to Menlo Atherton, how snotty a place it was. Frankly, snotty. It was very cliquish and snotty at Menlo Atherton at that time. I don't know how it is. Anybody go to Menlo Atherton?
It's the same.
Has anybody attended it? Is it cliquish and snotty or not?
It's the same.
Is it the same?
It's very clicky.
It's very same. This book has been mentioned in the Mercury News, and it was reviewed as part of one of the news articles on it. As part of the Beat Generation, there was a big art show in the Art Museum of Los Gatos. It's been down there. The mayor has really, Los Gatos, supported this book. And then Los Gatos Weekly did something on the book, but everybody kind of left out I didn't emphasize the sexuality part. They said, born in Berkeley, part memoir, part fiction, is set mainly in that small cavity of time between the Beat era and the emergence of the hippies, roughly 1965 to 68. The book is just out for Inkling Press. So it's a coming-of-age story of Carolyn Ryder in rebellion, who shakes off her family's influence and takes to the road. One person wrote on the back, an author, this is a good description about Lolita meets Holden Caulfield meets Fanning Hill, set in the late 60s in Northern California and Mexico, where life was changing, feminism awakening, and discovering its independence from patriarchy. A refreshing look at a time when everything changed. A time when we found ourselves, so sweet and yet so frightening, this discovery of life. So, any other comments or questions? Yes, your name?
What do you think inspired that movement in the 60s?
The movement?
Yeah, well, that whole coming of age of sexuality and coming to know your sexuality. What do you think inspired
The
that?
sexuality part or the whole thing?
The whole thing.
The whole thing. It was like this big awakening, like you have especially young people have the power to change the world, and I wish people now thought that. And they came together, it was like so many things, like they thought about all the civil rights when black people couldn't vote, they went, this is bullshit, excuse me. And the Vietnam War seemed like it was mainly after, it wasn't really it was after oil and greed, and they started just standing up for things. And there were people before them. I think there have always been rebels throughout time. People have looked at society differently, who passed them a cup and said there could be a more ideal way. I think I'm sort of conservative on one point, the drug thing. I honestly think it kind of wrecked it in a way. I think it did, and I think there were some parts of it were stuck in there to wreck it, so that the change wouldn't really fully happen. I'm not saying what people, their private use of stuff, I would condemn nothing, but I'm just saying I saw that put a big cloud over it, and there was some evidence that it was put in to stop it. But it was like this feeling that you can change the world. You don't have to accept how it is. You could follow the ideal you really have and make a difference. And it started out as a really pure, different thing. There was more friendship between men and women. There was more honoring of sexuality as kind of a beautiful, sacred thing. There was some real good with it when it started. I think the fallout now is you've got still the same bell-bottom pants, you've got some drug problems, you've got things falling out, but people forgot what it's really about. They forgot the spirit behind it. So, if anyone's interested in, getting books here or in the bookstore, I hope you'll do it as a special project, and I will leave you, if
What
you want.
are your bookstore?
Here, they're in 1967, which was the price of the Summer of Love. In the bookstore, it's a little higher right now, although we'll get them to mark it down. It's a little over 20. There's a flyer that has my phone number. If you want to do a project and you'd like some advice on the special project, feel free to call me. And if you get that book and you want to work with it and do a special project, that'd be great. I'd like to bring some 60 values back. Encourage the bookstore in getting that back out.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Anybody presenting tomorrow? Yeah. Okay, so. Okay.
And there's some flyers in the book too.
Okay, thank you.
Which is a book in the Foothill College bookstore.
And she,
This talks to human sexuality. How many people were in that class? You were. So yes, we'll have to be talking about things from a different point of view.
she's also the mother of a child who is autistic, her daughter Vanessa.
And developmental delay, which you're talking
And
about.
she has a daughter, Megan, who's gifted.
Right.
So she has two children on opposite ends. But she is also going to talk about the special gifts of her developmentally challenged daughter.
The developmentally delayed autistic daughter class. Well, maybe the theme for this class is what's normal and what is abnormal, right? And we'll talk back and forth about, you're discussing abnormal psychology, so what are some of the things you found out that are abnormal? Get me up to speed with your class. What have you learned about that's so-called abnormal?
Maybe we can just, what were you saying?
Anxiety disorder.
Anxiety.
Personality disorders.
Personality.
Psychoses.
Psychoses? Well, just first starting out, the other thing is who decides what's normal and abnormal. I learned from this guy when I was getting my master's degree some things about how there's a spectrum, and the very same thing that we call abnormal may have a gift hidden in it. You know, I don't know if you brought that point out, but things like we did some intern hours where he was getting his doctorate, and there was a schizophrenic woman who was very, very intuitive. Everything she said to me at the time was right and true. And so that we call things abnormal, but they also have sometimes very wonderful gifts in them. Being the parent of a special child, I certainly noticed that that special children, I've done some articles and been published and paid occasionally to write articles and book reviews about autism, being the parent of an autistic child, and how autistic people have special kinds of intelligence. Everybody knows that there's 7 types of intelligence. Do you know that or not? Okay, so there's mathematical and verbal intelligence. And if you take an IQ test, that's what it tests, right? I mean, pretty much. Isn't it math and verbal? But that's only 2 kinds. There's also kinesthetic and intelligence, which is your ability to move in space. And there's musical intelligence. And there is interrelationship to nature, natural intelligence, your ability to, like Audubon, to relate to nature is another one they've identified. But there are also some important ones, let's see, musical, natural, I think spatial was one. There's one, couple really important ones called interpersonal and intrapsychic. And I think this one might be spatial, I'm not sure. Any interpersonal and intrapsychic. Pardon? Oh, it's intra, it's interpersonal, sorry.
Interpersonal.
Oh, it is intrapsychic.
Interpersonal.
No, that's interpersonal. And this is intrapsychic. Yeah, I'm sorry. Interpsychic. One is within your own psyche, the other one is interpersonal, within amongst people. For the 8th intelligence. Okay, then we'll make that, but there's another one, and that's called intrapsychic. So, intra and inter. So, another term, interpersonal is also been taught. Sometimes people say intrapsychic or within the psyche. And my point is, before we debate this aspect of it, whether it's called intrapsychic, that there is an intelligence about your awareness within yourself of your spirit and the inside of you. And this is sort of linked to spirituality. Autistic people have intelligence that's really strong in these two. My daughter is really strong in these kinds of intelligences, and she can read people. She's very sensitive, very perceptive, but she doesn't have a lot of, she cannot do well on this kind of an IQ test. She would be extremely low in this kind of an IQ test, but she does have a lot of awareness in these areas which are not really tested. You're welcome to correct these, but my different systems, that one may be spatial. And so,
So these would be on the extra normals, correct, side?
extra normals.
Yeah, these are in the category of emotional intelligence.
Okay.
Well, or spiritual intelligence. So, like if you go in a house full of autistic people, a group home where my daughter had lived, and you're very upset over something, you feel you lost a very important relationship or something, and you're hiding it. You know, you come and you smile at the door. The regular people who work there will just say, oh yeah, your daughter's here. They won't notice it. But one time I was like that, and I walked into the room, and all these autistic people were very low, some of them on this, extremely low, and some of them can't even dress themselves anything. They walk over to you and they'll touch you. They know, they stop all their weird behaviors because they know exactly what you're going through.
They're like animals, they're able to pick up on your inner vibrations.
Different than animals. They really, different than animals. I think animals are wonderful, and animals are very, very in tune. But it's a little bit different than that.
Well,
Because
what I'm talking about is they're somewhat empathic.
they can be empathic. They can be, they can have precognition. For example, let's say I got a boy. I know there was a boy there whose mom didn't visit very often, and on the day that she decided to visit once in a month without anyone telling him, he stops doing everything he's doing and walks to the edge of the school field. Or a young man who can't shave at all, but he can wake up in the middle of the night and play classical music by ear. So it's human giftedness, but it's a giftedness that doesn't quite fit in the mold. And when I was talking earlier, we talked in the other class about the time in the 60s, which I've written a number of things, but this is one I wrote and got published recently. And what was normal and abnormal then? I mean, there were things that we did in that period. How many people can remember, were kids, or can remember the 1960s? Okay. You know what's really scary for those of us that can remember? You talk to younger people now and everybody's just staring at you. There's like, what happened? You know, there was a pivotal period of world change and change in the way we saw ourselves. And people changing that time and using gifts that society had not recognized were considered disordered and abnormal. And
Yeah.
some of them ended up in mental hospitals who didn't have pathology because they didn't fit a script.
Well, that's because social standards change within given time. Everything that's now may be changed in the future. And it's the way society views things as being normal or not normal.
Right, right. So these are labels of pathology, what's normal and what's not normal. I mean, clearly, Vanessa has issues in her brain and how it's functioning, but the human spirit shines out, and it'll shine out in a different way. You know, there are musical gifts that will come out in somebody who has brain problems, and there are gifts with people and gifts with their spirit that will come out. Like, so intra to me meant between people. The term intra, amid people, interpersonal. You're saying it's interpersonal in your sense?
Interpersonal and interpersonal, in his language.
Okay.
Interpersonal and interpersonal.
And intrapersonal.
So it's.
So here's interpersonal amongst people,
and
and
then
interpersonal would be that sort of among within the psyche. But the thing is that people with developmental disabilities we sort of thought growing up they weren't. I mean, I was a gifted child, and I thought I was all into civil rights and really revolutionary things, but I wasn't paying any attention to the people with developmental disabilities down the hall. They weren't even people in my thinking. What a mistake. Then I met one in my own child. So you do learn. And people with special needs and things that have affected the brain, you learn that the brain does not make who a person is. If you think of a TV set, you know how you have to turn the knob, turn it on? The brain is kind of like the knob. And it helps you get this, the reception, the step in, but it is not the whole person. And if you're around people with developmental disabilities, you see that their spirit is very big a lot of times, you know, despite that. So we were talking about what's normal and what's abnormal with special people. What's normal and abnormal, and we probably, all of us, have something in our lives that somebody in our family thinks is abnormal, or someone thinks is abnormal. And how do you really decide about pathology? What's normal, what's abnormal? Anybody have thoughts on that? Comments?
It's basically what society deems normal based on the population and what the norm is for that population, with a deviation plus or minus,
The sort of a socially determined kind of thing.
more or less.
We were talking about how in the last class, like, how women look. Let's just take that, because the subject was human sexuality. What's a normal way to look?
Originally, in the old days, it'd be the more heavy set, but with society's change, they go to the thinner side, as being this is more, how can I say, looked upon, to seen as.
But that's not really, yeah.
Well,
in
the
most
reason
of our
why they
cultures-
say, the reason why they say that people that are overweight, or we're not saying overweight, but heavier set, they're saying they're better child bearers and like this, but now at the same time, they have abnormalities because they're overeating and like that. Then you switch the spectrum to say, well, this is the ideal look because it's thin and it's idealistic looking. But then you're causing other problems, you know, starvation, anorexia, bulimia, and all this other kind of stuff.
And
Then they're saying that's
It's
unhealthy.
true. Even the idea that we have to be obsessed with how women look, that came in, I was talking about early cultures. I did my graduate work about cultures in Earth's history. For about 30,000 years, we saw God as sort of oftentimes our mother, because we knew that children came from women, and they thought that giving birth was sort of sacred, and so they thought that maybe God gave birth to the whole universe and could be a birthing God. And then when name and property stopped going from mother to daughter and went from father to son, the wandering, more aggressive tribes came in with a more punishing kind of God and a different concept. God probably never changed, but we humans saw God even in our own image. And women and people's body types and body shapes were considered really good or really abnormal, depending on facts. Like, for example, we talked about in the last class how at the turn of the century, you had to be at least somewhat fuller figured, a woman, to be a desirable marriage partner. And then at World War I period, where that war had made such dramatic changes and there were songs about guys and their buddies, breasts were very negative. And so they put tape over their breasts to be flowers and wanted to, and cut their hair to be a little shorter. Maybe the guy look. Now you're a soldier, that was in. After World War II, when so many people died, then replenishing families was a big deal, and so motherhood was in, and big bras were in, you know, and so where are we now? We have overpopulation, right? And so it's a crazy thing how we as a society decide what's normal and abnormal. Is there really psychopathology? I do some intuitive counseling, and I had a guy who came to me a few weeks ago who was hearing voices, and he thinks that these voices he was a big, burly construction guy, I think Hispanic, and he had never had these voices before. And then he was moving in 105-degree heat, some heavy things for his father, who had divorced the family and was a very religious guy. His father is a noble guy who does everything for churches, Christian churches, but not a lot for his family. And he wanted his son to go over and help some neighbors who were kind of in the son's view, some low-life neighbors, with some heavy moving, and from that day on, somehow, the son thought that the neighbors had crept into his mind, and that they're talking to him all the time, and telling him things day and night. And he says, I'm not crazy, they're really doing it. So how do you help somebody who may be having a biochemical imbalance, who may be hearing voices? He thinks that, is there any truth to it? It was really a challenge to me, and I tried sort of the spiritual and intuitive things, and I think this guy has a deeper issue, but there are people who throughout time who've heard voices of inspiration, like spiritual guides. They think an angel talks to them. How do you differentiate somebody getting an angel? In Judaism and Christianity and non-traditional religions, there's a lot of belief in angels. What about John Edwards on the program Crossing Over? Is he abnormal? He's hearing voices 24/7. How is he different from a schizophrenic person?
It doesn't affect his personality. He's able to function within society and does not cause problems within society to him or society. So you're saying he's more on the, we would classify him according to what we've learned in this lab, that he would be in the extra abnormals or extra normals, I can't remember what it's called.
Extra norms?
Yes, and then he would be classified as a mystic because he's able to transcend the general population and see things and visionize things in that
Well,
sense.
that's what this young girl in this book, she's sort of transcending her neighborhood is called Tupper's Park. And there, if you've ever been to, has anybody ever gone to Flood Park? You know where that is? There's a neighborhood there called Suburban Park. This Tupper's Park is thinly disguised, you know, of that place. And she's out kind of wandering around. Her mom is very difficult. Her mom's troubled and her mom has these conflicts and taking it out on her. So she's wandering around at night and looking at the stars. And then she meets people interested in civil rights and interested in the peace movement. So she's kind of a mystic in a way, wandering around, and like a lot of those sort of pre-hippie people, she's looking for something different. But some of those people got thrown in mental hospitals, not this girl. She meets in Mexico, in this book, a boy and a girl who've been thrown in a mental hospital because they had sex together, and now they're way into acting out their sexuality on the streets of Mexico, and their parents threw them in a mental hospital.
Is this based on a true story?
It is. It's all true stuff. If it didn't happen to me, it happened to somebody right in this area in this time. And it was a real pivotal period about sexuality and about values and about what was normal and what wasn't normal. And Larry had suggested some months ago including it as a supplemental text to his Human Sexuality and possibly other classes. It's now in the bookstore, and we have some that's interested. And it was mentioned, there was an exhibit about people not considered normal, but let's take Neil Cassidy as a perfect study of abnormal psychology. How many people have heard of the book On the Road? 60s people, you've heard of it. Very famous, not the 60s, it was written in the 50s. And this idea of going against the norm has not just started with the 60s people. It was going on in the 50s with the so-called beatniks, which were really the beat artists. They were beat. They were tired of the war. They were tired of the Eisenhower regime. They were just beat. They were tired of it all. And they wanted to live like the Beatitudes in the Bible, the lilies of the field. They wanted to kind of throw away the emphasis on things, take to the road. Every day, maybe somebody would give food. They'd find clothes along the way. They'd live simply, like the teachings of Christianity. It was sort of like, if you want to go back to, pardon me?
Sounds pilgrimage-like.
Pilgrimage. Yeah. Chaucer.
Lording's longing to go on pilgrimage. Remember that?
Say it again.
And it goes, I can recite the whole first chapter almost.
Wow.
Lording's longing to go on pilgrimage,
Wow.
which people are longing to go on pilgrimages.
Yes. So this beat thing is okay, take Francis and Clare in the 11th century. They lived in a town in Assisi, Italy, and everybody was very rich there. Everybody was into making cloth of gold. Their parents were well-to-do. They were going to inherit. They were going to have like CDs and bank accounts, but not at that time. And Francis went off to war and in the Crusades, and he was doing the whole military thing, and they were coming back to have tons of money and lots of property and be part of the town and the church. And then Francis was sick, and he had this vision, and he said, something spoke to him. He went in the middle of the town, took off all his father's rich clothes, stood there stark naked, and he just gave it all back to his father, and he wanted to rebuild God's church and make it simple and make it like a hippie-like church, where people made things with their hands and they kind of went on a pilgrimage. And Erica John wrote in the 70s, used some of Chaucer's tale and her stories, Fear of Flying. So that's what they did. And in the end of this, wrote a kind of a dedication that talks about Francis and Clare and said, Born in Berkeley is the memoir of a pivotal period in the mid-1960s. Although written as fiction, the facts are true. After the Beats and before the hippies were named, many neighborhoods like Tupper's Park sprang up on the San Francisco Bay Peninsula. The term beat came from the New Testament Beatitudes, which spoke of living simply. The meek shall inherit the earth. Beaten down by white American culture of the 40s and early 50s, beat outsiders wrote poetry to the beat of Negro hipsters' music. Meanwhile, mainstream World War II couples raised in the Great Depression bestowed attention and advantages on their post-war offspring, gave their kids a lot, patriotic ideas, and the leisure to question the 50s emphasis on conformity. Look-alike houses covered up shameful social problems. The cultural pendulum had swung too far. A small percentage of youth born into suburban security threw off their advantages and privilege. Very like the youth of 12th century Assisi, Italy, following Saints Francis and Clare, after whom San Francisco and Santa Clara are named. They threw away their parents' cloth of gold, cut their hair in this case, and took to the road, following Christ's deep message. Like these, Carolyn Ryder, born in Berkeley, was ostracized by her peers, called abnormal, by her peers who today try to claim the Summer of Love as their own. But by 1967, the real 60s mavericks had done their work. Their civil rights, peace, and free speech marches had broken ground for Be-Ins and Grateful Dead music. Now even the popular kids who had ridiculed their few long-haired classmates came to hate in Ashbury streets. In San Francisco, put on love beats for an hour for the weekend. The commercialized hippie was in vogue. But it was to the small group of 60s youth who first gave up privilege and followed that beat to the heart of a new and timeless life, to whom this book is dedicated. All of these kids who did this were called abnormal, neurotic, psychotic, but maybe they were like extra normal, but they were called abnormal. So there's really when you get into autistic people and you get into rebellious, idealistic people, who's to know? I've noticed that people who are, Leo Kanner said in 1949, when he coined the term autism, he was influenced by the Freudian period, and some of the Freudian ideas have been thrown out. For example, they found that the mothers were not cold like refrigerators, that autism strikes more commonly than blindness, it's cross-cultural disability. But one thing Kanner said is true. A lot of times in an autistic household, family, there are greater than average people with high IQs in the rest of the family. And I met a person recently whose brother is schizophrenic, and the man whose brother is schizophrenic is brilliant. He's done scripts at Lincoln Center, and he's a computer software designer, but his brother is mildly schizophrenic. And I thought about how sensitive people maybe have fragile brains. It's like the extra normal and the abnormal are just sort of on that threshold. You know, it's, yes. And what is your first name? Kay.
One of the things that's striking me about is hearing voices. I know when I was pregnant with my second child, I thought it was really something for me to come to terms with how I was going to love this one as much as I loved the first one. And it caused me a lot of anxiety. And one day while I was folding clothes, I heard a voice. And it was deeper than any human communication that I have ever received. It's just simple. Second children are special too. And it brought me peace. And I think that would be a difference between an extra normal experience, mystical experience, compared to a schizophrenic voice, is I think that the extra normal mystic experience is not a constant thing. I'm sure I can be motivated out of that one experience for the rest of my life to feel I don't have to convince anybody, just because it brought me so much peace, and it's good and it's peaceful. Whereas I don't think that is the case in schizophrenia. So I just wanted to see what you might think about something in defining that.
I was going to make a diagram of consciousness according to Dr. Mark Thurston, who is into transpersonal stuff. Like, this would be the point of our conscious mind right now, right here. I think right next to and here would be our subconscious mind, and here is the superconscious mind, and then the conscious mind. And the conscious mind is everything in this room, just what you feel right this second. The subconscious is everything you remember, like hidden memories in this life. Your superconscious mind is the part of you, our minds that are all linked together on a higher level. You could call it our higher self, the Holy Spirit, however you want to talk about it. We could all be linked in our superconscious transpersonal mind. And like that's the degree in psychology I have is transpersonal. And it means beyond the mask. So if you had like a mask, that's a mask, and everybody has this mask, but trans means to go beyond the persona or the mask that keeps us separate. Yeah, and in Roberto Assagioli's psychology, the psyche is like an egg, and you've got this sort of conscious mask, but again, you have this higher part coming in, and then down here you have what he calls subpersonalities. Let's say, there's the conscious self, and the higher self, and the subpersonalities. And subpersonalities are, let's say that you had parents that were very critical over sexuality, they told you it was bad. Maybe you formed a rebel boy who's going to have sex with everybody, and then you have the scared boy that thinks he's bad. And you act out the rebel guy all the time, and all of a sudden you get thrown in depression, and you're in the scared boy that feels he's bad.
That's what they call a chameleon effect.
Is it? That term I don't know. What is that term?
We have our perception and our projections of how we allow people to see who we are and what we want them to think and believe. But in the deep side, we actually are who we are, and we press some of it because it's not acceptable by others.
Well, that would be the persona. We kind of don't want people to see beyond the mask. But there is an exercise actually in Assagioli that we could do for a second on finding our subpersonalities. Is that okay, Larry? Okay, this is sort of a meditative exercise. So if you want to just get comfortable, it's a reflection. You know, you won't be hypnotized or anything, but it's a self-reflection. Okay, so just take a deep breath and let yourself get centered in your inner self. We could even turn the lights, I guess. Take a deep breath again, and you're letting yourself relax, and just know that you're very protected and comfortable and connected to your higher self. So, and I'd like you to imagine yourself relaxing completely and really being at ease to explore in a safe way aspects of your inner self. And as you breathe deeply, and you relax, you find yourself in a house, and maybe you're in a room and you can see a doorway in the distance in a locked room. And maybe this is like a little closet, and maybe it holds some parts of you. And as you take step one toward the closet, perhaps you're feeling relaxed and open to explore. What could be some of your sub-personalities? They might have names, they might look a certain way, you can imagine them. And two, you're moving toward the closet. You're very open to experience these parts in a safe way. And you're feeling very relaxed and comfortable. Three, you take your hand on the doorknob, and you open up the closet, and one at a time, some parts of you are going to come out. And they may have crazy names, they may be like characters. Just take a moment to imagine, see, feel, or hear who's in the closet. If somebody comes out, ask, what's your name? Who are you? What are you here for? What do you do for me? Experience and ask any character you've met, what do you do for me? It seems like a negative one. What do you do for me? When you're ready, kind of gently exit the closet, knowing that you're higher, deeper self can bring some unity to all of your characters. That they can come and go in a way that's healthful and constructive and unified. And let yourself kind of release your attention from the closet, and the characters can be out or in or wherever they'd like to be that's comfortable and safe for you. And gradually draw your attention back, stepping back from 3 to 2 to 1 and coming back. When you're ready, coming back into this room and feeling, refreshed and comfortable, you can open your eyes and share if you want. What characters did you find in the closet? Bring your attention back. Did you find something? Who was it in your closet?
My closet? It's kind of interesting. I didn't know whether I was supposed to just let things flow, kind of like in a meditation, or if I was supposed to try to think for myself in my conscious mind.
Kind of let it flow.
Yeah.
Any way it went.
See, that's what I was thinking about most of the time.
It's hard when our conscious mind tries to direct it.
Yeah, exactly.
Did anybody imagine somebody in that closet? Yeah.
Maybe like an older woman.
An older woman, like a grandmother type.
And kind of talking, like brings me wisdom.
A wisdom part.
I was beyond my years.
Okay. Yeah, so a part of you, wisdom beyond your years.
There was a child one.
A child one. An irresponsible child when you have fun. Great, thanks for sharing. Anybody else have people to comment? They want to share about? What did you have in your closet, Kay?
Let's see, I had a clown. I had a 9-year-old girl,
A 9-year-old girl?
plaid dress, purple plaid dress that I did have wear. And also kind of a chubby girl, very nice, just
A real nice girl who was chubby.
kind of chubby and just wonderful.
These could be like just little aspects, that you might think about that repress, have experienced at some point in your life as part of you. It's kind of now in the closet. The girl who once was chubby but can be wonderful. The 9-year-old girl, or never was.
I don't think, I was never chubby.
Never chubby.
Never. But she was nice. I feel safe around a person like that.
Okay. The safe part. It's kind of
I
great to
could
be.
use some for, I could use some to
Uh-huh.
feel that comfortable.
But comfortable with yourself, maybe she symbolizes. With being whoever you are.
Yeah.
Hard to say. Anybody else want to share? What do you
Yeah,
have?
I had some pretty weird stuff that came out of my closet. When I first opened up the door, all this fire came out at me,
Wow.
and that was because I guess Godzilla was on the other side.
Wow.
And then he came out, and then this little midget came out, and then after that, then these balloons, these big red balloons came out, and then in the very back of the closet, there was a katana standing up.
Katana?
Yeah, katana, a sword.
Wow, so really different parts, like you guys,
Yeah.
so did you ask what they were there for or what they could do?
I didn't really want to ask anybody what they were up
Okay.
to. They looked like they were social.
Okay. Anybody else want to share? Found it. A lot of times the pieces that you find, now Roberto Saggioli would call them subpersonalities, kind of aspects, one that balances another, and that sometimes ones that seem kind of creepy can have a really good part of us hidden in them. Like, when I was in graduate school, we did a sand tray, and we made these little figures. We picked all these little toy figures to be parts of us, and I had this like witch one from Wizard of Oz and everything, and then we were supposed to meditate and say, well, what are you there for? And I got the witch was my spunky part, my kind of mischievous spunky part, and I needed that spunk. So something we put as bad might be really good in the closet. So again, it kind of ties into normal and abnormal stuff. Comments, Larry, or any thoughts or questions that are pertinent to the class?
Can you tell us a little bit more about treatment strategies for children who are special?
Well, there isn't really like an official treatment for autism. Autism is a catch-all term that sort of throws together a lot of things that go wrong, that are happening in our brain, that make brains injured or different. Autistic people have disorders of language and speech and communication. They want to have things sort of organized in the outer world because it's not organized inside. There's some different ways their brain are processing their senses. I went to a holistic clinic of holistic MDs in Arizona, and I found the best treatment strategy there. They said that it's sort of like the autistic person is on a trip. I mean, the brain is not bringing in the messages from the senses exactly right and normal, supposedly. So maybe they're wearing a coat, but it feels heavy as iron, and they're trying to take their clothes off because it feels so heavy. Or they have, they're trying to smell their breath because they're getting no idea of smell, or they're banging their head because they can't feel much. They don't feel pain. So they said to the holistic people, which I like better than the Western allopathic, the holistic people said to just gently redirect that by stimulating those pathways in a healthy way. Like you could take a person who can't feel things and have, like Vanessa put her hand in warm water or cold water and try to identify the difference. Or take a kitchen scrubber and scrub on her arm so she can feel a lot of touch and build a new pathway. They also had people crawl, go back to creeping and crawling, which has to do with brain hemispheres, to help build new pathways in the brain and to give the body the message, the brain the message that it's missing. And so there were some really nice things. They also had her look in the mirror and tell herself she loved herself. One of the things about Vanessa that's really interesting, she doesn't have any of the conditioning that, say, girls and women have. There's something wrong with us. Is there any woman in here who's never felt there was something wrong with her body or her appearance who lives in our society? Raise your hand. No, because the whole society is telling you, you got to fix yourself or buy this or buy that constantly. Vanessa has none of that. She thinks she's beautiful and fine, just the way she is.